Oh, the man of tomorrow is here and ready for you, baby, to get into our Zomia ONE Underground Wednesday Q&A. Of course, that's underground only, means you're the only ones hearing this. Those that get past the mighty wall. No, where is that mighty wall? Supposedly. Anyway, no, just a paywall. But regardless, what a week it has been, and it is not stopping. So Sovereign Tech had to come out a little bit late this week, but of course, we'll be back to the Sunday schedule here in pretty short order. I got a lot of great questions in this week. I got a couple from a great patron, and I want to make sure I hit both of those. So we're going to get into those. But before I do any of that, gotta say, I have been, and it's really been, because it's a couple of entertainment questions. We got a fitness question that came in, going to get into that in a second. Don't have any tech questions. So if you're one of those that I guess doesn't, even though I think everything is technology related, like you literally, such an important thing to drive home here. You cannot today, really, unless you're like trying and actively you want to speak about something other than tech, you really cannot have a conversation today that doesn't have to do with some kind of bullshit coming out of Silicon Valley. I mean, you just can't, or at least, at the very least, where that's not somehow the cause, right? It's impossible. I could, if I wanted to, I mean, in some ways I kind of always have, but if I really wanted to, I could talk about anything on Sovereign Tech. I don't even have to really talk about tech because its tendrils are in everything now. Everything coming outside of Silicon Valley, which, for a lot of people, they consider Sovereign Tech to merely be a Silicon Valley watchdog show. If that's how you experience it, well, even then I could still talk about just about anything because, again, it's everywhere. And you could say, well, tech has always been everywhere in human history. Sure, it has. But now, there is like a central focal point where that comes out of. And, you can always point at it at where this is the cause and this is what's happening, So anyway, I say that merely to point out that whether I'm talking about entertainment, even fitness and other things, it's how all of it is a tech conversation. It all ultimately has to do with tech. In fact, it's talk about something that's getting crazy out there. The amount of streaming services that are dropping like flies. I didn't expect half of it. We've all seen this coming. We've all known that this is going to happen. That, you're probably going to get left with Netflix. I don't even think CBS All Access will go through all of this unscathed. But you'll have Netflix. Maybe you'll have HBO of some kind, like DC Universe shows. You might not have even known this, that there is a DC Universe, streaming channel that's all DC Universe content, which is both, it's funny. It's amazing in one sense that we live in a world where you can kind of, all right, here's a quick part of this conversation, and it's going to bleed in nicely to the questions that I got. Actually, I got the questions on Patreon, interestingly, but it'll bleed nicely into those questions later on. Here's the strange thing. So all of these streaming services that are going on, Netflix, Hulu, blah, 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 whatever. Netflix is very broad. Okay. And they're just throwing more and more money wherever the fuck they can throw it. It's really amazing. And I don't mean that necessarily in a good way. Hulu is kind of broad, but the bulk of these new streaming services that are coming out revolve around certain niche parts of franchise entertainment, like DC, the DC Universe channel is all about the DC Universe. But then the expectation and the requirements to make running these streaming services viable is that it's not niche in its appeal. Like, it's a niche product, but everybody has to watch it. And how people in Hollywood don't see this as diametrically opposed. That, okay, we want them to pay for a DC Universe, streaming service. And so we want them to be into DC, and there's so much content on there. We want them to watch everything DC. DC is like, there's no way they could watch anything else in their life other than what's on DC Universe, right? But then, but that's a niche thing, and we recognize that there's a strong niche for this. But then to make it viable, to make it justifiable, to make it affordable, or profitable, should I say, to even run a streaming service based around the DC Universe and the DC Universe alone, everybody on planet Earth has to watch it. How did nobody in a boardroom see this as nuts? As like, wait a minute, that math just doesn't work. We can't run a niche product and expect everybody to be into it, because by its very nature, it's a niche fucking product. You got me. I don't know. I don't know how half of these decisions are getting made. I really, really don't. There's either some kind of, all I can imagine is, and this again will speak nicely to a question we have later on in the show. All I can imagine is that either these people are either just incredibly stupid, or they're incredibly brilliant and they're doing something. There's some kind of experimentation going on, like behavioral experimentation or something. I don't know. Those are there's always more than two possibilities, but those are like the two primary possibilities that I can only imagine how this is working out this way. It just doesn't make any fucking sense, the strategy that these companies are engaging in. Because DC Universe, that streaming channel is going to fail. If they're just going to toss all their shows onto HBO Max or whatever it's called now, if they're just going to toss everything onto that streaming service, like, why have the other one? Of course it's going to fail. Very weird. So anyway, speaking of streaming, I got to tell you, the one thing I am looking forward to now every single week is, Tuesday nights at 6:05 p.m. when NWA Power comes on. That is some solid ass wrestling. I get so excited. I am, chomping at the bit. Tuesdays have become an incredible day because you get Security Now, my favorite podcast. And frankly, you get the only thing I give two shits about really watching on the regular, on quote unquote TV, even though it's only on YouTube or Facebook Watch. And I'm sure as fuck not going to watch it on Facebook Watch. But NWA Power, man, that's been a lot of fun to see something old school really do well while bringing in a lot of newer elements, but it's still that old school style. My only hope is that it doesn't fall prey to exactly what we were just talking about, where to make this viable and worthwhile and profitable. Billy Corgan's running it, of literally that Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins. Obviously he's got plenty of money, okay, to even do this in the first place. But I hope it's profitable enough, but like they don't have to draw in, I don't know, however many millions of people, as long as they don't have to have millions of viewers, and they can get away with, or at least they don't have to have tens of millions of viewers, as long as they can have that. I don't want them to change. Like, I like what they're doing. I know they're figuring things out as they go along. They're taping, they're taping these things in advance, and they are, thinking about it and being very methodical. I want them to continue that process. I just hope that they're willing to give it the time. In fact, it's funny. Quick conversation on this, and just to show you how things are different. And again, this is also going to play nicely into a question that we have later. There's a company, in fact, we're going to talk about this during our Album of the Week segment on this Q&A. There is a company called Rock Candy Records. All they do, they do not sign new bands. They don't do anything like that. They will take classic albums, generally rock, maybe sometimes a little bit of pop or something, but generally some kind of rock or metal. They will take those classic albums and they will put them through a remastering process, and it's beautifully done, and they turn out wonderful. They will maybe put on some extra bonus tracks of some kind, maybe songs that had never been released previously, or some live cuts or edits or something like that they will add on to it. Now, I was going to the site because I am very interested whenever Rock Candy comes out with a new album, because generally it's an album that I love, and some of these albums could stand a good remastering. Again, we'll talk more about that during Album of the Week. And I was reading, I forget the name of the band that I was reading, like Rock Candy's write-up about. But let's be clear here. Rock Candy is run by industry professionals and industry veterans in music. Okay? So these are people who, A, have been there in the music industry for decades, since the 60s or even 70s or even 60s. Okay? So they know what the fuck they're talking about. And, they were there. It's not anecdote. They're people that actually worked on this shit and were there and saw the contracts and everything in the industry at the time. Okay? These are authorities. We don't like to use that word often, but we're going to use it in this case. These are authorities when it comes to music. They absolutely are. Now, I was reading this one, they do little blog posts about the releases that they have coming out, because they don't release a ton of albums. There's very few. But they're talking about this one band. I forget the name of the band. I know it begins with a G, but that's not important. And they were saying, this is how the blog post opened up, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist. And you can go there if oh boy, I don't believe Brian Sovereign, no, modern music's fucking great. I don't believe Brian Sovereign. Okay, whatever. If that's the case, I'll find you the link and I'll send it to you. Just, message me or whatever. And it said, one of the great things about the music industry in the 70s was record companies allowed bands to grow organically, sometimes over several albums. So what they're saying is that in the 70s, if you had, some great songs, okay, you would get a record deal, right? You would get a contract for such and so many records, which still can happen today, but I don't think it's certainly not as lucrative as it used to be for the artist anyway. And even then, that's debatable if it was ever lucrative so much for the artist, but I would say yes, it was at one point. And so you would get like a 3, maybe 5 album deal with with a record company. Now, I'll grant you, those record companies would expect those albums to come out lickety-split, come out pretty fast. I mean, for example, Kiss, throughout the 70s, they had, throughout the entire, from 74, when they released their first album, to whenever, throughout the rest of the decade, they had, sometimes it was 2 albums a year, but at least 1 album a year. They had come out really until 1986. That's incredible. Consider that today. Now it takes 3, 4, 5 years, or hell, if you're Tool, it's 13 years to come out with a new fucking album. Okay? Consider that. That's amazing. So it's not like the record companies expected you to work. All right. They weren't just tossing you money and, maybe we'll get an album someday. It wasn't like that. Even though I know that bands do have deals like that now with record companies. Like I know System of a Down has that kind of deal where they are required with who they're with presently, I think, to release a couple more albums, but it's been like 15 years and now the record company just leaves them alone, I guess, about it. But whatever, regardless. Okay. So you used to, that you'd get these deals, and the managers, the management, the music industry in general understood that, okay, we know we've got something here. We got to give this time. We got to take the risk with our money, and maybe we'll get something special out of this. And if we don't get something special out of this, well, we have other bands that are doing, double platinum albums that they'll make up for the slack. Okay? Like they used to be willing to take some risk with their money. And, this, man, I could have such a long conversation around entrepreneurship with this, because more and more this whole entrepreneurship thing is just fucking horseshit. Because, real business, real entrepreneurship, and a lot of this other shit, comes down to a lot of risk. But no one's willing to take a risk anymore. Everybody's like, okay, give me my stats from Google and Facebook, and if I don't see the ROI, fuck it. And it's like, Facebook and Google are just making you some pretty spreadsheets. They don't know any better about who's looking at what and buying where. It's like all you basically have is the bottom line. And the only way you get real bottom line, and you get it in the black is if, as compared to the red where it's negative, the only way you get it in the black is if you take some serious risks, and nobody takes risks. Everybody's like, oh no, well, I'm not, no, we're not ready to market, to do marketing. We're not ready for this. We're not ready for that. Well, it's like, well, then shut up. You're not a business. Industries used to take risks, and that is largely gone. Not always, but largely gone, And in fact, and even if they are, say, a company or industry willing to take a risk, often enough, they're not willing to take the long-term risk. Okay, like these record companies in the 70s. So fine, we'll give a band 3, 4, 5 albums to figure it out. Okay, to hit that magic sound, because if they get one hit out of those 3 to 5 albums, it's going to pay for everything. Right? If they get one genuine hit. So they understood that it made sense to do that. And, that record deal, again, it wouldn't last forever, but it would be something that would go on for quite a few years. And that's why I say that to contrast it to, Google or something where you could say, well, Google takes plenty of risks. Yeah, but they shut shit down in no time. They'll come out with something new, and then they either put it in the grave by no longer developing for it or promoting it, or they literally put it in the grave by shutting it down. And they do so in very short order, and they don't give it the time to allow it to, like I mentioned with these bands in the 70s, organically grow and mature and become something really special. Okay, so now I'm bringing all of this up, and I'll bring this back to what I was talking about, which was NWA Power, the wrestling show. And that is, there is this expectation today that if you don't do 1 million downloads or a few million views or whatever the fuck, that, oh no, this doesn't work. Nobody's willing to give it the time. Like the bands in the 70s were given multiple albums to figure shit out. Yes, that was risky, but the potential for the return, the nay unicorn, of that, getting that one hit or something like that would make it all worthwhile. And we live in a world, like I was saying, where unfortunately nobody's willing to really take the time with it. No one's really willing to risk anymore. And it's so funny because I'm constantly hearing how, entrepreneurship, yeah, they're all about risk and they're all this. And I don't see anybody risking shit. Nobody's playing a good long game anymore. Nobody's, risking long term. And that's real risk, is when you think about it in the long term. Now, I mean, I get it. Some people say, well, entrepreneurs are, they're risking their own livelihoods and all that. Okay, well, whatever. Then you can go fucking eat, ramen noodles and whatever else for however long, and you'll be fine. Just don't do it for 20 years. Otherwise you'll get cancer or something. But, you have to do it for 10 years. Fucking fine. But don't give me your shit of how you came from nothing and blah, 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 about that when all you're really risking is yourself, and you're not putting a whole lot of other risk really out there, and you're not trying to bring other people in on your team to risk with you and even to sell them on that. It drives me nuts. So I hope that this is one of those things, with NWA Power, where they are willing to put in a very, very long-term risk and just stay out there until people just can't avoid it. They can't escape it anymore. That it's there. And also I hope that they are doing things in such an inexpensive way that, again, that they can just appeal to a niche, and they don't have to have millions of viewers. I mean, if you get enough passionate people, okay, they can make up for whatever. Well, for example, in fact, I know there's a business book that talks about this. Speaking of with music, actually, like Iron Maiden, not everybody in the fucking world is going to listen to Iron Maiden. It's just never going to happen. But all Iron Maiden needed was, and this is true for Dream Theater as well, where all they needed is that dedicated 100,000 people or so. And I'm pretty sure NWA Power can get that. All you need is those dedicated 100,000 people that will just buy anything that you have come out there, more or less. that will just jump on it. And you can live a very, very comfortable fucking life on that. So this need for, I'm just hoping that this is one of those things where they don't feel the need that, oh, we have to have everybody fucking watch this shit. In fact, this is also going to be a conversation that'll dovetail into, we're going to be talking about on TIE Fighter Renegades this month of October 2019. Rob and I know we're going to be talking about the Benioff and Weiss thing, and I have some words that speak directly to what I'm talking about here. Because there are problems with that, because we've heard, now we know Benioff and Weiss's strategy for how they got Game of Thrones off the ground, and I think if you're a fan of fantasy, you should be pissed as fucking shit about how that happened. We'll talk about that in TIE Fighter Renegades. So anyway, but I got to tell you, what's going on with NWA Power right now, I mean, it's so fucking exciting. I love it. Now, speaking of power, speaking of a little bit of fitness, let's get into a little bit of fitness. Then we got a couple of great questions from a longtime Sovereign Tech supporter who I just think she's dynamite. No pun on AEW there, by the way. AEW, they had that one segment with Cody Rhodes and Chris Jericho. Boy, that was a good time, man. That was a good time. When Cody Rhodes stuck out his hand and had MJF wrap it up with the scarf and he punched through the glass. Woo, that was some good shit. I mean, the rest of the show wasn't that great, but that segment was Cody Rhodes. That boy can do some business. Anyway, I love that guy. Okay. Speaking of fitness, so I have a couple of listeners that I'll regularly talk to, and, we kind of talk back and forth on, some fitness and bodybuilding goals and things like this. And I'd recently talked to them about how, a problem that I've been running into, and they wanted me to talk about this on the show. So whatever, they're patrons, they're underground members. Fine. I'll talk about whatever. Folks, you control the show, this show especially. Whatever you want me to talk about, you email me, you message me, you DM me, whatever, you tweet at me, and we'll talk about it right here on this Wednesday Q&A. Okay, whatever you want me to talk about. If you don't like what I'm talking about, I tell you this all the time. All you got to do is you ask me the question, and I'll talk about anything you got. Okay, especially now because, the question hopper is a little low. But anyway, so something that I've run into. And, when you're working out, whether you're, depending upon what your goals are as far as bodybuilding, lifting weights and all this stuff. Okay. One muscle group or muscle that is a challenge for lots of people, because this is one of those things that really comes down to genetics to have something that can look really good, are calves. Your calf muscle, very, very difficult to develop. Unless you've been hiking mountains your whole life, I mean, it really, really can be a challenge, no matter how much weight you're putting on it, to develop your calf muscle. I mean, in fact, a lot of people don't realize this. This might be the number one muscle. You might not even know that this gets done. This might be the number one muscle that gets implants, that people get implants for. I'm not kidding. I mean, it's actually very popular for a lot of people to get like bicep implants all over the place on their body to make them look huge. You know what I mean? It used to be quite a scandal back. I mean, it's been a scandal for a while, but I remember in the 90s, there were quite a few scandals around it where they did find out that certain bodybuilders like a Mr. Olympia they actually did have implants. So calf muscles there are people who get implants in their calves, just to do something so that, they can look symmetrical, I guess you could say, because it's a very hard muscle to develop. Now, I don't think I necessarily have that problem. Again, it can very much come down to genetics, whether or not you can really build, very large calves. I don't think I'm one of the people that has that problem. But something I was discussing with them, the only real pain point that I was really having pain in my Achilles tendon, specifically the one on my right foot, but both of them were really, really killing me. Now, I started experimenting around this because what so I wear five finger shoes. I've talked about this on the show. I wear five finger shoes. They're Gold's Gym, like, and they're made by Vibram, so they're official, quote unquote, five fingers. Okay, this isn't some knockoff of some kind, some knockoff brand. And also, these are not like things not made for the gym. They are they literally say Gold's Gym on them. It was a partnership between Vibram and Gold's Gym. These are five finger shoes meant for the gym. Okay. So, I got these and I've been trying them. I've been wearing them for a very long time. And one thing about these shoes, as good as they feel in just about everything, and as helpful as they have been for, especially with my form, like when I do a squat, when I do a back squat or a front squat, but when I do a squat, I had when I was wearing more traditional shoes. In fact, I was wearing Under Armour shoes. I mean, look, like I do my research on this shit. Okay. like I really look deeply into this stuff. I'm never wearing, any kind of knockoff brand. That's never the problem. I'm never, it's nothing. Like, I make sure I'm wearing stuff that is supposedly, at least, made for the task at hand. Okay. So I was wearing Under Armour shoes, before this. And the problem that I was having with form is that when I would go down on the squat, I mean, I'll squat deep, but my heel would come up. And it's not supposed to. You want to keep it good and flat. That's to activate the quads and all this. Okay. So that's part of the reason I got into wearing five fingers again, because those are designed to where, they are going to keep your foot in a more natural state. Right. And so instantly when I started wearing those, my squat form, went from yikes to perfect. Okay. Or near perfect anyway. And I've been very pleased with that. The problem is that doing any kind of calf press, and understand that, I'm calf pressing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Certainly more than what is natural, and certainly far more than if you were, climbing mountains, hiking mountains your whole life. But anyway, my Achilles just be killing me, for days after the fact too. It was not good. And I finally came to the conclusion, or to the idea anyway, that what might have been going on is that those five finger shoes are not high tops. And there's no ankle support. And there's no, there's no support for the Achilles tendon. As to where just about any other gym shoe I've ever worn, is usually like a high top, and at the very least you have the tightness of the laces, like giving you some kind of support or something along those lines. And you have some kind of support. So I decided to make a change on this, and I think it's worked out very well so far. I'm not running into that pain like I used to. I mean, and basically what I ended up getting, and this is what people wanted me to talk about, the shoe change that I went through. It's hard to believe, when you are wanting to go for a certain monstrous size. There's so, if you were just, again, if you weren't going for crazy size, then, hey, you know what? Probably working out barefoot, which I did that forever. When I had a home gym, that'll do great for you. But if you're trying to get to any kind of, shall we say, inhuman mass, which I am certainly going for, you gotta support your shit. You gotta support your joints. You gotta support your stuff, to get there. So anyway, I did switch up shoes, and I actually went with, now I've known this part for a good long while. And you might find this helpful yourself. Okay. I've known this for a good long while, that for decades, throughout much of the history of bodybuilding, do you know what shoes most bodybuilders wore? They just wore a pair of Chuck Taylors, a pair of high top Chuck Taylors. That's all they ever wore. And that did the whole business for them, and those were, now I know there's companies that sell, of course you have The Rock, he sells his own shoe and all this. I wasn't going to go there again for a few different reasons. But regardless, bodybuilders for decades have basically just wore a pair of Converse. That was their go-to. They wore like a pair of basketball shoes because they have a good flat, even sit, so it's great for the squat, right? There's no forward momentum on them. And they have the high top that, they have the support at your ankles, a little bit of support. Now, again, there are shoes that have like a lot of support that are totally custom. You would never wear them outside of the gym. They look funny because they have a very weird design to them that, and that's if you are, thing is, I think now, while I do want to get to a quote unquote more inhuman size, I don't want to get, preposterous. Okay. Like there's guys out there that just look, I look at them and go, whoa, no, I'm not interested in going there. So, those shoes might be pushing it. So I didn't go with those, but basically I was, looking into this. I'm like, okay, I got to find some kind of alternative, and come to find out the greatest bodybuilder of all time. And he is, okay. He really, really is. No, not Arnold. Even though I think Arnold could easily sell his own shoe. In fact, I'm surprised he never did. But Ronnie Coleman, the king, Ronnie Coleman, who is tied with Lee Haney for the most amount of Mr. Olympia championships, awards. He's taken home 8. He is widely considered, pun intended, he is widely considered the greatest bodybuilder of all time. And I don't really disagree with that. He is the fucking man. In fact, like even if you went on Instagram, people talk about, The Rock, everybody watches The Rock's videos, or everybody hearts, The Rock's pictures and everything. Well, let's ask the question. So does The Rock actually like talk with and heart and view videos of anyone on Instagram? Well, I'll tell you one guy he does, Ronnie Coleman, and he calls him Big Bro, and he doesn't call many people that. And that's because everybody knows Ronnie's the king. So Ronnie has his own kind of shoe. It's called the Carbon Training Shoe. And you can get it right through his site and everything. And that's what I've been messing with. Unfortunately, they're all black, which is nice as well for me. But they are, they're basically, just well done Chuck Taylors. They're not Chuck Taylors, but they look very much like them. But it is that classic styled shoe that bodybuilders have been wearing since bodybuilders decided to put on a pair of shoes. So you really can't go wrong with this. And I've been very, very pleased with the results on them. So, just putting that out there, if you are running into this issue as well, because actually I don't find a whole lot of people talking about this online. I was actually going to message Jeff Cavalier of Athlean X, and I was going to be like, hey, could you, talk about this? What's going on? Why, and it's not improper form. I think it's a matter of the amount of weight without support. Like, I really think that was the score. So I'm putting that out there as that's my experience, and basically saying, at the very least, if you're not going to go with a pair of Ronnie Coleman shoes, wear a pair of high tops for fuck's sake. Okay. If you're going to get crazy with your calf muscles, understand, the calf muscle is something, and I do, that you can work out every day. Like, you can lift with it every day because its recovery time is so quick. But they really, really do need that support if you're going to go to the, the next level. For a long time, I was only doing, calf raises basically with, maybe 100 pounds. Okay, total, like 50-pound dumbbell or something in each hand. Then you get into like calf raise machines and things like this, and now I'm doing, say, with both feet, single foot, I'm at around 200 pounds. But, with both feet, I'm doing around 500 pounds or something like that. And so, yeah, you need support when you start getting into those weights, right? So anyway, you might find this helpful. I know I have a lot of people. Well, again, the reason I'm even talking about this is because I had a couple of listeners that did want me to talk about it. So there you have it. Anyway, maybe I'll put a link in the show notes for those. I don't have any kind of affiliate link or anything, so don't think it has anything really to do with that. So let's get into a couple questions. One of them is actually very short, so that works well because we're already halfway through on this episode. Even though last week we went an hour and a half, and I got a lot of great response from that episode, from that Wednesday Q&A last week, where we ended up talking about Kabbalah and all kinds of crazy shit. So Anyway, this is a very, very quick shot question. Well, here, actually, so this gal made 3 comments, and I'll read you the third one first, and then we'll get into the 2 questions. So here's the third comment. And please, again, there's 2 questions. And then she says, and please be as long-winded as you want in your responses to these questions on your Q&A. And if you wish, if you choose to answer them, of course. So thank you, because I can get long-winded. But yeah, so these are questions that are where there is a somewhat of an expectation of long answers. We'll see how long they go. The first one I might not have as long an answer, but there you go. I'm thank you for the, absolutely. I'm willing to be long-winded, and I appreciate that you appreciate that when I do. So, actually, through the magic of editing, Ellen just walked in the room, and she just brought up, got a couple starships that I had on pre-order for some time, from Eagle Moss. Boy, of course, Star Trek starships. I've talked about these a few times. I've never done like full-on reviews of these things, and at some point maybe I should. But I actually just got the Scimitar, or Scimitar, however you want to pronounce that, from Star Trek Nemesis, which is a movie I actually really enjoy. That I kind of understand some of the hatred towards it, but I actually think it's a really great flick. In fact, there's an episode, if you listen to Sovereign Trek, there are previous episodes, I think, where I included the review that I did of Nemesis a few years ago on a rewatch. But anyway, this looks amazing. I mean, the ships I like to collect from them are kind of the rare ones, like the ones we never get a great look at. I mean, I have pretty much every Enterprise under the sun here from Star Trek. But I like to get the ones that are, I don't know, like there's something very different, or they're a rare look at something else. And of course, this was a Riemann warbird, right? But its name was the Scimitar. This is kind of cheap. Actually, like it's stunning to see it in so much detail. They don't let its wings like really fully span out, but that was Star Trek Nemesis was a very dark movie. And so you really couldn't get a good look at this ship. So it's interesting to get such a great look at all the detail that John Eaves, who's just one of my favorite artists, he designed this, that John Eaves did for it. But Eagle Moss's actual production, like these are supposed to be die-cast ships. This thing's barely die-cast. These wings are really bendable. Boy, I'm afraid if this thing dropped, it would just snap in half. And it just feels cheap. And these things aren't cheap. Not monetary wise. That's very disappointing. I could see why maybe a lot of people didn't get too excited about this one, because I got to tell you, I think it looks like shit. But oh well, the magazine that comes with it will be interesting to read. At some point, actually, Eagle Moss announced. I don't know if we'll get into this in the next Sovereign Trek or not, but Eagle Moss announced that they are ending their main, which is pretty much how they started, I think. Their main... Fuck, this thing won't even stay on the stand. Outrageous. No, anyway, whatever. They're ending their main subscription, Star Trek Starship subscription line, which will end at issue 180, which, I mean, that's amazing. That's been like one a month for years now. Or well, for some time. Maybe it's more than one a month, but because to get to 180 already, but whatever. But they are ending that, and they are only going with, I imagine, probably because like that whole magazine subscription service, which did we talk about that? Where did we talk about that? Like it was on the last Sovereign Trek where we talked about like Star Trek Fact Files, and we talked about like how they made card sets for Operation Desert Shield, not even Desert Storm, Desert Shield. Crazy. You'll have to listen to that to find out more about that. But it's interesting that they are ending that, but they are still going to release more ships. But I guess they're probably going to do show-specific ships, like they do Star Trek Discovery ships right now, which are separate. And they're probably doing pretty well, because now most of the ships they make are a larger size. They're like a special edition. As to where originally they're only about 5 inches, now they're doing like the 8 to 10 inch to 12 inch even lines. And they can sell them for like twice the price. Obviously because they're twice the size, but really it's the same plastic, or I mean, it feels like it's mainly plastic, but die cast line or mold process. So I imagine that's far more profitable for them. But I have problems with this company. I really do. Part of me wishes I never really got into this. Not because necessarily because of the money, but just like, I don't know. I feel like there's something not right about this company. But anyway, we're not going to go there right now. We have questions to get into from listeners, and those are what really matter on the Wednesday Q&A. So first question, is read any new sci-fi novels lately? And that's it. That's the question. There's a bit of a longer question for the second one, but there's the first one. I have been reading. Here's the trouble. And in fact, maybe I'll bring this. I wasn't sure where I was going to be able to bring up this bit of conversation, but maybe I can bring this up now in this question. So, I have read some new science fiction novels. Not just listened to, I've read, because there aren't audiobooks for a lot of these things. I haven't read like any new series. I haven't, taken a dive, even though I've heard like Steve Gibson, my hero, he talked about the Terran Fleet Command or something like that, some kind of trilogy that's out there that sounded kind of interesting. But it still sounds kind of like Space Marine. And, I don't think that's Steve Gibson's flavor. But frankly, if I want to do Space Marine stuff, I'm going to go play Doom, right? I mean, like that's the pinnacle of Space Marinedom, if that is such a thing. But I will tell you what I have read in a second. Or no. All right. I'll lead off with what I have read. So I did read, and this was actually really, really cool. I read The Astonishing, which is a novel. That name might sound kind of familiar, The Astonishing. It is a science fiction novel, but it's a novel based off of Dream Theater's concept album from a few years ago called The Astonishing. And it's written by Peter Arulian, who is also a metal artist himself and a writer, and he kind of tries to combine that into like weird fantasy realms. And The Astonishing is just such a thing. Now, this book I know it had been done and came out a long time ago, or a couple of years ago, but it was very limited in how you could purchase it. It has an introduction by Dream Theater guitarist John Petrucci, of course, and it's ultimately based on the story that John Petrucci and Dream Theater came up with for their concept album, which is a pretty cool story. Kind of reminds you, if you're familiar with the storyline around Mr. Roboto from Styx, that album where like in the future rock and roll is banned and all this stuff. It's along those lines where everything is being made by AI, and there is something lost in that, and humanity is kind of falling apart because of it. And there's like a rebellion around it and everything. It sounds cheesy as hell, and it kind of is, but I thought it was really cool. I really dug it. So I read that. I thought that was a really cool book, and you don't really have to be a Dream Theater fan to appreciate it. In fact, there might be, I've been going through a lot of philosophy texts lately, real ones, not ones by people who claim to be philosophers. And in fact, Nietzsche is really big on music. Like he thinks music is this very unique part of the human condition that is actually one of the rare things that points at our evolution, even though we're still animals, but points at our evolution away from our more animalistic ancestors. Again, he doesn't give that credit to morality, laws, government, or most of the things that you imagine in culture, but music specifically, he calls out as and I'm going to paraphrase it with this word, though he wouldn't use it, as an ascension property. It is a property of the human condition that shows it ascending to something else. So there is an importance to music, and I really appreciated The Astonishing, kind of hitting at that. It's actually central to what we are as human beings. That was pretty cool. So I definitely recommend checking out that book. It used to be very hard to get your hands on. And even when you could buy it, it cost, I don't know, like $70. And then there's a special edition that costs $150. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where like Iron Maiden, there's some of these bands, they have their 100,000 followers who will buy anything that they put out, and they'll spend any amount of money, and they can just live off of that. And The Astonishing was kind of one of those things. But now The Astonishing is available on Kindle, so you can get it for like $7. I mean, yeah. So that was really cool. The other book I was actually a reread. I've been going through William Shatner's Tech War novels again, which those started in '89, and he kept publishing those all the way up till '97, not counting the comic books, which some of those actually just came out a few years ago even. But it's a total of 9 books. I love this series, and I think there's so much brilliant shit in this. That I totally recommend it. I mean, it's kind of a future cop story in a way. It's kind of a cop story in the future, has to do with drugs and blah blah blah. But it really goes into a lot of different directions, especially when you get into the much later books like Tech Power and Tech Money. I think it's a brilliant series. So I have been rereading Tech War as well, as far as that goes, as far as science fiction novels. But I've been listening to a lot of different things as late that aren't exactly sci-fi. But also I did a full review of this on the latest episode of Sovereign Trek, where I listened to, quote unquote, reread the Star Trek the Motion Picture novel, which I think is great science fiction. Forget about it even being Star Trek, though that's important, but forget even about that. I think it's genuinely great science fiction. I really, really love that book. So that was a pleasure. But, speaking of pleasure in reading, I want to get into that. Okay, here, quick. I read a lot of books. Like, I read every Star Wars book that comes out. Every Star Wars book that comes out. I read every canon Star Trek novel, like the Star Trek Discovery books. And admittedly, these books take up most of my time. And I've got to tell you, it's getting annoying. And I know I don't have to read these things. Okay. But there's 2 points to this that I want to bring up. One is that if you are, and I'm not saying everybody involved has to do it. Okay. But to me, if I am presenting, like if I'm doing a show about Star Trek, we better be talking about as much, Star Trek, at least that's canon, which means that it's something that people can share and can, glean or, shine some light on whatever we happen to all go and enjoy, say in the theaters or something like this. Okay. Somebody on your team, in my opinion, I get it's just my opinion, and I'm saying anyone else really has to do this, but like, I really think you should be talking this shit up. If it's canon and it has supposedly anyway, some kind of bearing, or at least there's the claim on what's going on. If you want to be out there, I guess, let me make this simple. I know what I enjoy, and I like listening to people who know, shall we say, little known things, or who pay attention to detail. And if I am doing a show about Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever, I want to be, at the very least, and I'm not saying anyone else has to be, but maybe someone on the team needs to be that person that has like the little known facts. I mean, like on TIE Fighter Renegades, there's plenty of things that I know I didn't experience in Star Wars history where Rob, totally has my back, and it's beautiful. And that's a great, and that's the thing, is that you want people that I can't stand, I've stopped listening to Jedi Council, to Collider Jedi Council, because nobody there, they don't, they're just talking shit up, and they talk about it from like more of a business perspective, and not from like an in-universe Star Wars perspective. And so I don't fucking care. As to where, honestly, like a couple of years ago, that show was actually really great, where, Harloff and, Ken Knapsack, there we go. And Ken Knapsack, like those guys they were reading everything. They're on top of every comic book, and they're going into it. Now it kind of ended up being fruitless, but I always enjoyed that they knew all of these little details. you know and yeah, I want that to be presented like in these shows. So I feel a certain personal duty, just because it's what I want out of a show, to do this, to consume all of it. But and this is true for Star Trek and Star Wars, but I gotta fucking tell you, it's getting to the point, like, there are so many Star Wars books that have come out. There aren't that many Star Trek books that are actually canon, but there's so much shit out there. Like, it takes a lot of my free time. And I know it doesn't have to. But there's the person that I want to be on air, okay, that has all of this knowledge, right? But the funny thing is, and here's the reason I started it in the first place is, and I had a conversation about this with a great Sovereign Tech listener as well. But I started doing it because I loved it, because I love Star Wars, because I love Star Trek, because I love blah, 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 blah. Okay? And so, and I've even said this, especially like on Sovereign Trek episodes, or I know I've said it on TFR, where like, oh, how terrible, we have to talk about Star Wars, or we have to talk about Star Trek for 2 hours, or something like that. What a hard life. Woo! Wipe the brow, right? And it speaks to, what you're constantly told is, like, the way to live is that, like, what's the old saying? If you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Let me tell you something. That's horseshit. That is utter horseshit. Okay? Because like I said, I started this because I love Star Wars and I love Star Trek, but it's gotten to the point, and, I can ultimately say it's my fault, but then also you got just these money fucking grubbing corporations that are in charge of these franchises and universes now, and they just don't stop, like they won't even let you sit and breathe on the content. And in fact, I read a great quote. I shared this on Twitter. I know I did. I read a great quote yesterday that said, to the effect, corporations exist to manufacture, not create. And I think that is so dead on with so much of what's going on in entertainment right now. But here's the thing. I am growing to hate Star Wars, because it is like to consume all Star Wars, everything that's supposedly attached, the whole universe is interconnected and everything. So to have the full Star Wars experience, like, it's almost to the point you have to literally live Star Wars, live and fucking breathe it. And I'll never sign up for that, because I'm not a one-trick pony. I'm not just into, this is kind of like that DC Universe conversation we were having earlier in all this, and it's weird because, okay, so to justify everything that they have, that they're doing, the books, the comics, everything, like, they've got to be getting everybody buying into this at some point, right? But then at the same time, they want you to just like be into their niche. And it's getting weird because now entertainment is starting to really feel like sports. And I know I was there in the 80s and the 90s when you had Star Trek versus Star Wars. I got that. And that's bullshit, because at the time you were able to just sit, like, enjoy an episode of The Next Generation and relax, go see a Star Wars movie in theaters and relax, and sit on that for a while. Now it's just, you're getting hammered over and over again, over the head with, okay, no, now this book's out, now this comic, this is out. And it's just, and it's insane. And they're all running off of this idea that it's canon, which frankly, they don't really care about that. But I'm growing to hate these things, and look, I am doing what I love. I am consuming these universes that I have grown up with and that I am so passionate about. But now it's like, it's so much, and they just keep throwing it at you. I mean, fuck, good thing Audible's only $15 a month, because if you had to lay out $30 or however much a pop for, these fucking books and everything that comes out, I mean, no one could keep track. No one could afford to be on with this stuff. Um, yeah, like I'm growing to actually loathe it and not love it. So that whole idea of do what you love, oh no, 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 that has the, there is an upper limit to that where you can really get too much on that. You really can, and I think there's a bigger conversation to have around that. But I want to bring that up. Like it's fucking annoying, you know that, and the sad part is, and ultimately this speaks badly of Disney because again I don't have to do this, right? And Rob even tells me, yeah, Brian, you don't have to do it, man. You're taking it for the team, it's great, but you don't have to do this. And Satan bless him for that. But it ultimately speaks bad about Disney because like I kind of wonder if most of this, just most of this content was great that they're having me take in. I mean, fuck, we got a TV show starting on November 12th, The Mandalorian and so on. If most of it was good, I'd probably be a happy boy going around. But the bulk of it is pure rubbish. It is pure shit. And it's funny because I don't find myself, speaking of reading new sci-fi novels, I don't find myself reading a lot of new stuff. And you know why? Because the new stuff that I actually do read, you know what all of it feels like? It feels like somebody, and this is true for Star Trek, Star Wars, and even other series, okay, that are modern. It feels like they took, and I remember I talked about this, the most egregious example was the Canto Bight novel, the Star Wars Canto Bight, or it was actually like 4 stories in one book that came out around Last Jedi. I said, you know what? They could have picked up like a couple Las Vegas or a couple novels about gambling in Las Vegas from the 1960s or whatever. They could have picked those up by some shitty ass author that nobody's ever going to remember. And they could have just, put it in, scan them, put them into, I don't know, Office or some kind of software and just said, find all these words. And like anytime it says Vegas, replace it with Canto Bight. And I swear they could have done that. Like that. And in fact, I'm still wondering whether or not they did. And it's feeling like this more and more where basically these novels, there's nothing about these novels. I was just reading, it's sad, like with and maybe I'll end up talking about this. I'll end up talking about this on TFR. What was the name of the book? There was another, so Rob and I, on the last TFR, we reviewed a Galaxy's Edge novel called Black Spire, okay? And it was great. I was like, wow, that was really cool. That felt like Star Wars. There was, like it felt different. It felt like that story needed to be told in the Star Wars universe as we knew it, okay? And so it worked, and it was great. And that's the thing. A lot of these books coming out now don't require the fantastical settings, outer space, far off worlds, whatever, to tell the story. The story is basically, it's a Babysitter's Club book in outer space. And who the fuck wants to read that? Like, it doesn't even make sense. So there was another Galaxy's Edge book that I knew was coming out. I didn't know it was going to get an audiobook. Okay. But it ended up getting an audiobook, and so I listened to it, and it's by Zoraida Cordova, and it's called A Crash of Fate. It's Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate. And this book was some dumb-ass, like, relationship crap book, a woman who, she keeps falling for the wrong guy, and all this other stuff. It was so bland, so banal. There was nothing about it that said, okay, this needs to happen on the planet Batuu. This needs to happen in the Star Wars universe. There was nothing Star Wars about it. It was horse shit. And I think a lot of companies are putting out a lot of crap. I think they're literally recycling books from decades past that aren't even science fiction novels, putting a veneer of sci-fi on it. And then they're selling that as like, okay, buy this book. And maybe they attach it to some franchise and then make you think it matters. And that's the thing is that, I don't even mind if a story is not that great. Okay. But at least make it something that feels like it requires to be in this universe. It needs the magic of this universe to tell this story. And we don't get that anymore. And that's as true for Star Trek as it is for Star Wars, as it is probably for a whole bunch of horse shit out there. I don't even want to know what Doctor Who novels read like now. It's a sad state of affairs. And it's not like there isn't original shit that could be done. I mean, go read the latest Peter F. Hamilton shit. The stuff's awesome. So, yeah, anyway. I am growing to loathe everything, I guess. But, oh, fuck. I swear, I can already see it. That, like, a year or two from now, I can just imagine that I'm going to be saying this, that novels, reading the written word is the only viable and exceptional form of entertainment worthy of your consumption. I can just picture that that's going to happen. And then, even then I'm going to say, and it's going to be outside of some kind of franchise, like it's going to be works outside of a franchise. Dune maybe being the exception. Everybody should read the Dune books, the original 6. But anyway, okay. So we do have another question. You said you didn't mind if I got long-winded. I got long-winded on you. I hope you had fun with that one. Let's get to the next question here. You said the comic book industry is from the same person. You said the comic book industry isn't the comic book industry you grew up with. What do you find wrong with it today? Oh boy. Looks like we're going to go a little long on this one, on this Q&A. Everything I just said about novels today, or about some novels today, franchise novels anyway, that is also a problem with comic books. Nothing feels like really special anymore. There's so much to say about this. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is that when I was growing up, comic books, like an issue of Superman or Batman, was 9.99999 times out of 10. It was a one-off. It was a simple one issue, one story. That was the end of it. Okay. And you were done. It did not take you 6 months or a year or more to get conclusion to a storyline. Much of what we've been talking throughout this whole Q&A, the idea that the comic book industry is no longer, and whatever's behind this, and look, this is true for the entire entertainment industry, from video games to movies to TV shows, whatever. There are two forces, and I think that they are actually opposing, but there are two main forces going on. One is focus groups, okay, where everything goes through multiple focus groups, whether it's to make sure somebody doesn't get offended or to make sure it's acceptable to one, whatever the fuck. Okay, everything gets focus grouped to death. That's one. The other force at play here is that, and I mean, I don't know what kind of budgets they need for comic books, or if it's because they need crazy turnaround times. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, but for some reason, comic book companies feel like they have to make just this metric ass ton of money with every issue that they sell. I don't know how that came to be, because I can guarantee you it was not always that way. It really was not always that way. I can tell you what started on making comic books, or I have an idea, I should say, of what started to make, because there's never just one thing, but what started to allow comic books to make a ton of money, okay, especially in the 90s, which is when a lot of this started going on. But then you have, and this is where that focus group thing becomes an opposing force, is the focus groups won't let comic books be what made them sell so goddamn much. So let's talk a little bit about what I think, and I'm not the only one, but what I think caused this, really what ended up being a phenomena in the 90s, where certain issues of comics would have multiple print runs. Okay. Now there's a collectability thing that came out of the 90s because you had the economic boon of the 80s. Okay. That, people were just throwing money everywhere. And in the 90s, you ended up with like all these multiple covers of everything. Now that worked for a little while, just like how baseball cards were a hotness. Like I said, if remember, I mentioned this earlier, and in Sovereign Trek, where like you could literally, the 90s was such a crazy time that you could make money off of making a fucking trading card set, not about baseball, but about a fucking military operation like Desert Shield, and there were even cards for Desert Storm after that. Okay, which was, the original Iraq War. That's crazy town. So certainly that's part of it, is that you had like these multiple covers that everybody would jump on. This is going to get into, though, ultimately what it seems like most comic book companies can't do anymore, and why they're not selling so well. Okay. But anyway, you had these multiple covers and all this stuff. That certainly got DC and Marvel and other companies that whetted their appetites to where, fuck, with one issue, we can sell, as long as we put a different cover on it, we can sell hundreds of thousands or millions of copies. We have to do 5 print runs and all this. And I mean, look, even up until fairly recent history, I can remember even in 2002, actually, when Devil's Due rebooted or restarted the G.I. Joe comic. They went through like 6 print runs with issue number 1 of a fucking G.I. Joe comic. And it was a little company like Devil's Due. Devil's Due is still around. But they were a totally new company back in 2002. 6 print runs. That's crazy town. Anyway, so certainly, you had that. But what was really going on is you had your baseline comic book fans that had been around since probably the 60s, were still enjoying and maybe buying a few more, series because they had the spending power in the 80s, okay? And you had that baseline fandom of comic books, okay, that were into comic books. What ends up happening, and not that this was new, but it was the first time that it wasn't just made for kids, even though it would be on Fox Kids of all ironies. But you had... You can't say enough of how much this changed the comic book industry. While this is not the greatest comic book movie of all time, I give that to the 78 Superman. The Tim Burton's Batman, okay, that from 89, that movie was huge, changed everything, and it made Batman something that was like dark and gritty and more for adults. Now, what comes out of, were there an increased sales of comic books that year? Yes, of course there was, because of that movie. But what really did it? I mean, one movie, people go and see it, and at the time when VHS wasn't even like the biggest thing yet, it wasn't like people could constantly rewatch it or something, so it wasn't in the popular consciousness as much, okay, at the time, where it just like would constantly feed people's desire for, I want to read more comic books. So what happened? What happened is, a few years later, you get Batman the Animated Series, arguably the greatest cartoon of all time. And the reason it's considered the greatest cartoon of all time to this day is because it treats no one like an idiot. Whether you're 6 or 60, you are not a moron. And this content will be made for you to enjoy. And it was a very, very, talk about magic, it was a magical cartoon series that absolutely could appeal to everyone. And again, much like Star Trek, like classic Star Trek, didn't treat anybody like an idiot. Star Trek Discovery treats plenty of people like idiots. And so when that happened, that's when kids all started watching. You had a cartoon that longtime comic book fans would fucking love. And oh, did we? And then I was more of a kid, I guess, at the time. But anyway, then the kids would jump on this because it was on Fox Kids and was being billed to kids. And they'd watch it and go, wow. And I don't know what was going on in the 90s. A more interesting question might even be, I don't know what was going on in the 90s that allowed for these cartoons to appeal to such broad age ranges. For example, Gargoyles, right? That was a Disney, or ultimately a Disney property. That was a brilliant cartoon to this day. One of my favorites of all time. But it was made for kids as well as adults. Very clearly. You could clearly see that. If you're an adult, there was a lot more to take in on what's going on. It was amazing. Okay. Anyway, so you had Batman the Animated Series. That turned so many kids into comic book fans because they just wanted more, because that show was so goddamn good. They went to the comic book shop, give me more of that guy. That show was so good. I mean, it was the very first time I can think of where a character would end up transposing. I mean, you'd have plenty of characters that would go from comic book to cartoon, but not the other way around, cartoon to comic book. And of course, you had the character of Harley Quinn, which was not a DC Comics creation. That was a Bruce Timm creation that ended up in Batman the Animated Series, right? So that became a big deal. And then you had X-Men. You had the X-Men cartoon at the time, which same score, right? Marvel knew exactly what they were doing. In fact, Marvel would have a string of, I would say, very faithful to the comic book cartoons, and ones that also treated no demographic like an idiot. The kids could enjoy it, adults could enjoy it, whatever. They had Iron Man, Silver Surfer, even the Fantastic Four cartoon at the time. This is all in the 90s. The Spider-Man cartoon was huge at the time. Fox Kids was the destination, baby, for great television at the time. It was amazing. Okay, to say nothing of Power Rangers, but that was certainly something that maybe didn't appeal to the adults so much at the time. But regardless of all that, so you had these great comic book adaptations that got a new generation of people into comic book stores. All right. And because of that, because of those great cartoons, and because they were so well done and they were so risky and shit was on the line, characters would die in those cartoons. Those cartoons were dark. They were serious, and they weren't lollygagging around with this message of, oh, we have to have hope, like the MCU has, which is just horrible. Okay. And so you had all these people going in there, and it became such a thing that for a while, that Marvel's like, well, this is what people are into. Why don't we reboot our universe? And they ended up doing like Heroes Reborn. That didn't really take off because I think ultimately they didn't realize is that, yeah, you're getting kids buying comic books again and they were enjoying them, but it was too early. That generation that got sold on comic books because of those cartoons, X-Men, Spider-Man, and Batman the Animated Series, they weren't old enough yet to have so much disposable income to where you could make a shit ton of money off of them. Okay. And their parents weren't going to understand, this ultra rare foil version of such and such comic. That just wasn't going to happen. But sales definitely went up in comic books because the kids just couldn't get enough, myself included. Okay. And then you had your hardcore comic book fan base that was still, buying in. So the 90s was a very strange time for for how they were able to sell, so many comic books. And when you get into the late 80s and 90s, this is when, you had beforehand, you had Crisis on Infinite Earths, you had all these other things. You'd have some big storylines that would happen in Marvel and DC, who were still, the big heavyweights. Dark Horse was just starting out, and some others, and like Image were just starting out. Okay. They would do these storylines, but they would more or less keep the storylines. Like maybe there'd be an issue where it had something to do, like an issue Wonder Woman would have to do with it. But by and large, they would sell you, like, either the storyline would exist across these comics and there weren't that many. Okay, like there weren't that many titles that you would have to buy. Or they would do it in either maybe a one-off graphic novel, or they would do it in a 6-issue miniseries that everybody could jump on. For example, like you had the Eclipso series back in the day. You had Final Night. You had a few of these different ones, in the 90s. Okay. There were these big DC Universe or Marvel Universe events or something like that. But what ends up happening, and I can remember one of the, it was not Last Laugh. It was the Killing, no, wait. Yeah, it was Last Laugh. Not The Killing Joke. It was Last Laugh. Joker's Last Laugh, where supposedly the Joker was going to die. I think this is like in 2001. This is when shit started to get crazy. There was the miniseries for Joker's Last Laugh, but then every title in DC, and there were a lot of them. I mean, there wasn't just a Flash comic. Impulse had his own comic. I mean, like all these minor ass characters had their own comics, right? Because they were coming out of this 90s boom that was directly correlative to the cartoons, which those cartoons eventually ended. And I don't know what happened there. Kids went to high school and were told that this stuff isn't cool anymore or something or what, I don't know. But regardless, okay. So then DC, they got greedy. Okay. And Marvel did the same. And so you would have the miniseries you'd have to buy, and then to get the complete story, you'd have to fucking buy at least one issue of every single title that DC was putting out there. And, a kid, certainly, and even adults would go into the comic book shop like, I gotta buy all these fucking comics? Like, I remember at the time, I felt like I'd spend a whole paycheck in the comic book store. And after a couple of weeks, I went, like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And it's more of this, like, too much, right? And the problem is that for whatever reason, and again, like, that boom in the 90s, whatever killed that off, I'm not exactly sure, but it stopped. And so these comic book companies were just doing every goddamn thing they could to try and replicate these numbers because, I don't know, Joe Quesada wanted to buy a Corvette that day. And goddamn it, he couldn't because, Spider-Man didn't sell 20 million copies. And so these companies just got really fucking greedy because of, and again, there's a few reasons. There's the collectibles, having all the different covers and all this stuff. There was the way that they were doing the story arcs, the universe-wide story arcs that fell apart. Again, when I was growing up, none of those things were a thing. Or if they were kept in their place. They were kept in some degree of check. They were affordable. Okay? And in many ways, you didn't have all of these characters constantly crossing over with each other, anymore. And it's not like you didn't have plenty of characters because you had like 3 different Justice Leagues. You had Justice League Europe, you had Justice League of America. It was because you just had that many characters that you could have that many teams with. Same was true. You had the different X-Men teams, you had the West Coast Avengers, you had the Avengers. But then when DC and Marvel, I guess, got it in their heads that, well, we can sell a shit ton of copies if we make these stories cross over with every title. Then it turned into same thing where, like I was talking about with Star Wars novels earlier, it turned into the same thing where, holy fuck, I have to read like 100 comics a month to get the entire story. And not only did you have to read that many, you had to buy that many. To say nothing of like, if you wanted to try out something new, it was a deluge. It was so insane. And it used to not be that way. And then, then also that's the same time when comic book companies started doing these story arcs, not just across the universe, but within the titles themselves. And, you would get, I can only imagine, especially classic comic book, or, like Gold and Silver Age comic book fans, they're used to getting a story and oftentimes they get a moral, and sometimes a very progressive one at that, moral at the end of the comic and all this. And now, these comics were navel gazing. They were no longer social commentary, which was something that attracted a lot of people onto them. But, you would have to, and this is true now, like with Star Wars comics, which I read every one, where I've got to wait like a year, it feels like, to know, okay, so what's going to happen, with what got set up in issue 44, and then I have to wait until issue 70 to find out. Like, this is just, comic books used to not be that way. And it all comes down to this absolute, greed for, we got to sell all these copies. Now, let's get back to the focus group part of this. Okay? And I am supportive, and I've always been, and I have very logical, artistic defenses for this. Okay? Here's the thing. Comic books, another part, and a big part. There are whole companies, especially Image, and like Image was a bunch of different companies, right? Like there was Top Cow within Image, there was Dreamwave and all this. Okay, there were entire companies that they did millions in the 90s. Again, partly because people had some disposable cash, and you had, a new breed of, or a new generation coming into the comic book stores because of, again, the cartoons. They did millions, not on necessarily alternative covers, even though alternative covers would partly sell into this or partly play into this, but on the fact that you had, let's just call it, scantily clad, like crazy proportions people, not just women, men too, and whatever else. Okay, John Johns? On the covers of these comic books. And on the inside as well. I mean, like it wasn't just don't judge a book by its cover. Oh no, it wasn't just in the covers, on the inside. I mean, I can't even imagine the cup size that like Wonder Woman's breasts got to in the 90s. And I'm not complaining. Believe me. Okay, I mean, and there were so many. I mean, and Power Girl was, well, Power Girl. This was everywhere. Sex was selling comic books in the 90s like there was no tomorrow. I mean, and you had, you could just imagine like some of the, like, what was it, the X-Men #1 or whatever that was, that Leffield or McFarlane that was on board, or McFarlane did the Spider-Man issue. You have Cyclops in him. He's just rippling. I mean, Arnold couldn't possibly look like him, and it was all this larger than life stuff. And, every comic book was basically a giant billboard for people's eyes. And you were just looking at it and go, holy shit, that's got me going. And I'm not really knocking it. Now, there are people, psychologists, whoever else, that want to get into that. Oh, this is setting up like crazy, unfair expectations for what men and women need to look like and blah, blah, blah. And I get to some degree where they're coming from. Okay. Like I can appreciate that. All right. But ultimately that comes from a lack of having a firm grasp on reality and fantasy. And you say kids can't help that. Well, where the fuck are their parents? Oh, their parents are sitting on their lazy asses watching TV or doing who knows what the fuck else in the kitchen. Maybe if parents spent time with their kids, they would have a better grasp of the difference between reality and fantasy. Ultimately, I will blame them. But regardless of that, okay, no doubt about it, that was selling issues of comics like hotcakes. No doubt about it. Now you get to today. And this is where the focus groups come in. In the focus groups and the supposed thought leaders or online publications, see you later, Kotaku, haha, and whoever the fuck else are, just thriving off of all of these hot takes. Or you have people who, and a lot of times, like, hey, if, Asian people don't get a lot of representation in entertainment, that is a fucking fact. By comparison, to other groups, that is a fucking fact. There's no, I won't argue against that for a second. Okay. Black people still getting, treated in stereotypical ways in a lot of entertainment and content and all this. Is that happening? You bet your goddamned ass it is. Yes. No doubt about it. No argument from me on any of that stuff. I'm not saying that any of that isn't real. Okay? It is. Is it great to have, to have like representation of a lot of different minorities? And I don't just mean racial, I mean all kinds of minorities. Is it great to have representation in comic books of those things? Absolutely. In entertainment? Absolutely. I'm so on board with that. I was talking about Space Marinedom earlier, right? You know why I love Doom? Because I thought, so there's a long theory that Doom is actually, like the Space Marine in Doom, is the descendant of the character from Wolfenstein 3D. who is a Jewish guy. And so I thought when I was a little kid, fuck yeah, the Doom guy is awesome because he's a fucking Jew, you know? And I say that because I'm one. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know, here I am, Jews in space, let's do this. Right? Like, I thought that that was really cool. So yes, I understand the desire for wanting representation, you know, of some kind of minority, whatever, okay, in entertainment. But then let's be clear about this, that when you are trying to have representation for those things, that is a niche, okay, that you are trying to appeal to. You can only, if you are genuinely trying to appeal to that niche, you can only sell to that niche. You can't sell millions of copies. It's not possible. And on the flip side, so you say, well, let's put this issue of, you know, X-Men #2 or whatever, because it's a load of shit. No, I love the X-Men, but let's put this issue of X-Men #2. Let's put it through 20 different focus groups. Make sure it doesn't offend this person, this person, this person. Make sure it's acceptable to these parents. Make sure it's acceptable to this, blah, 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 blah. That way the parents don't have to actually do parenting and they can just hand it to their kid and walk away, and not have to think about their child because they're depressed. You know, they're in their own lives. Okay. Whatever it is, it goes through all these focus groups. And by the time it's done getting focus grouped to death, which is a phrase that we need to accept, you are left with nothing. And you are left with something that, who the fuck would buy that? One of the top guys at Marvel, actually, in fact, I know I talked about this on a podcast at some point. This is years ago. He came out and said, you know, we tried to appeal to minorities and our business tanked because of it. Again, they went through, the problem wasn't that they were trying to appeal to minorities. That's not the issue. The problem is that they want to appeal to minorities and make $20 billion at the same time. When, again, like we were talking about earlier, that math doesn't add up. You either make something exceptional for a certain group of people, because everybody has different tastes. So to make something exceptional, you can't make something that people will talk about for years. You cannot make something that appeals to everybody. That is literally impossible. That is impossible for humans to achieve. You can't do that. Because everybody's different. Everybody grows up in different lives, grows up in different parts of the world, whatever it is. They have different cultures. They have all this stuff. You cannot make something, that says something, that has staying power, that will create a fan, that will create a long-term customer for you, and have it sell, just like crazy numbers that you thought you got in the 90s. What sold crazy numbers in the 90s, again, was, you just had a bunch of horny ass fucking people that were finally, being able to buy content that didn't treat them like an idiot, and that was like larger than life and all this stuff. And then, you get into the aughts and you get into the past few years and they're constantly reselling #1s. And so you're losing your long-term fan base because they're tired of rebooting universes. Right. And then also, you are focus grouping it all to death to where nothing happens. You won't kill off characters anymore. Hell, this morning, Wednesday, what's today? The 30th, October 30th, 2019, this morning, there is a, what is it? Like the dark multiverse or something that DC's doing, where they are rehashing the death of Superman, the biggest selling story arc of all time. They are rehashing that, where Lois Lane is going on revenge and like she becomes the Eradicator, is going to start offing everybody. And it's so funny because the Death of Superman comic series worked because it felt like, yeah, no, they're really, and that was the verbiage coming out. No, they're really killing Superman and he's done. And they needed to say that because ultimately, let's be real here. I mean, let's be frank. I mean, I was there. I was reading Superman comics in the 80s. Superman would die a couple times a year. It wasn't a big, he'd die. He would die. They needed it, but this was an event because no, guess what? We're killing off Superman and we're replacing him with 4 Supermen. And they didn't have that all planned out ahead of time. They were like, DC was experimenting and putting money on the line. What happens if we kill off Superman and we put 4 in his place? This is going to create new characters and all this. And that's what they're going for. It was the right fucking move. on their part, and it does. It ends up becoming the biggest selling comic book event in history. Still is to this day. And now you can make a multiverse comic that you're just loving and going crazy with, and will probably sell well. I mean, I'll admit it. I even downloaded it. I'm like, well, I got to check this out, because you did an event that had real weight. Okay, I mean, did I want Superman to die? No, fuck no. In fact, I remember. And I've told this story before. I remember when I was reading it in the newspaper, I was walking up the street to my house from my grandmother's house. She gave it to me in the newspaper. She's like, "Did you hear Superman's going to die?" I'm like, "No, I know what you're talking about." And so I wouldn't even ride my bike. I was walking my bike up and holding the Superman, or holding the newspaper on the handlebars. Okay. And I was reading it, and I can remember the tears falling down on the ink of the newspaper, because I was so sad that Superman was going to die. Like that, no, like that's not okay, for that to happen. But DC didn't focus group it, didn't worry about the fact that little Brian is going to cry his eyes out, and they did it anyway. And now it's still one of my favorite stories. In fact, the novelization version of it is fucking brilliant. Hell, there's even a great game around it that Capcom made for the Super Nintendo. I am so glad that the writers went ahead and said, this is going to piss some people off, but goddamn it, we're going to kill Superman. And they did it anyway. They took the risk. And now, even today, they are making comic books based off of that storyline. 30 years later. You got to take those risks. Those are the things that stand the test of time. And eventually, like, if it's that exceptional of a story, if it's that exceptional of something, even if, or how about, there's the classic, speaking of G.I. Joe, I mean, that's certainly a niche taste, okay? But everybody talks about that classic issue of Larry Hama's G.I. Joe from the 80s, where there wasn't a word spoken. It was Snake Eyes, because he's mute. I mean, there wasn't a word spoken. It was just action, and everybody talks about that comic book to this day, even if whether they like G.I. Joe or not. They talk about it because they talk about the great artistic prowess of it. Okay, but they needed an issue. They had a contract to put on an issue, so they took the risk, they took the shot, and now, 40 years later, 30 years later, whatever, we're still talking about it. Okay, my point being is that even then, that was appealing to G.I. Joe was appealing to a niche. Okay, but because it was so well done that when you gave it time, decades to sit, now it's considered legendary by everybody, even people that don't give two shits about G.I. Joe. And so nobody's taking risks anymore, and nobody's willing to do these little one-shots, I mean, I think I gave you a lot as far as why the comic book industry it got greedy. And it didn't just get greedy, but it also, it's still greedy, because that's ultimately why they're listening to a lot of these focus groups. They still, Marvel's got to be this billion-dollar company, or they don't even want to keep their doors open. DC is the same way. And because of that, and I don't know what that says about financial incentives, but I don't think it says something good. And boy, do we got to start paying attention to that. Too many people, I think they hear that when you start questioning financial incentives, they're like, "Oh, you fucking anti-capitalist," and all this. Whoa. No, let's take a good look at the state of entertainment right now, and we all know it's crap. It ain't what it used to be, and it's not because of a lack of creativity or originality. It's because somebody's wanting to play it safe to maximize profits, and that's got to be looked at. That has to be questioned. It doesn't mean you don't like markets. That doesn't mean you're anti-money or some other crap like that. It means you're asking a fucking question, right? The old saying goes, questioning authority isn't about being right or wrong. It's about questioning authority. Don't have to be right or wrong. The process itself is worthwhile. There's something wrong. There's something really, really wrong with financial incentives. Anyway, the comic book company, or the comic book industry, has paid the price. Pun intended. They've paid the price. Because they think that they have to do crazy money. Now, let me give you, in fact, please allow me to prove my point. Because I can give you a real world example of a company that's doing ridiculous money. Okay, now they're not doing billions and billions, but it's a company that is thriving, that is growing, that is employing people, that is making a very comfortable life for all involved. And that has respect from the comic book fandom. Zenescope. 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 This company is doing very well for itself. Started with one title, Grim Fairy Tales, okay? And part of how they were able to do so well is they used a lot of public domain characters to start building up and work with their original IP. But they start this up, and what are they doing? They're doing the crazy, sexy covers, right? They're doing the artistry inside, all this stuff. It's all either, openly sexual or quasi or whatever. And they're doing like the hard twists in the stories. They're graphic. They're very, they're not treating any demographic like an idiot. Okay. And they're doing very well for themselves. They have a whole universe now that's grown out of like originally one title that turned into like 4. And it just keeps going. And eventually they'll probably like scale some of that back. At least I hope they do. But they know what works and they get away with it. Why? Because they're not trying. They're not trying to get everybody to jump on board with their shit. I mean, folks, I know everybody loves Star Wars, but really, shouldn't we see it as a bit of a problem that the new Star Wars trailer airs during Monday Night Football? You saw that? Rise of Skywalker came out during Monday Night Football. Why would you do that? Because not everybody watches football. No, they don't. It's because you're trying to reach somebody new. You're trying to reach, Joe 6-pack of Old Mill. And that's a problem. Because you can't get anything exceptional that way. Especially when you appeal to the fucking dum-dums. So Zenescope isn't trying to do that. And they're not bothering to make movies. They're not bothering, even though I bet they could make some fine ones. They're not bothering to do anything on YouTube or all this horse shit. They are doing one thing, and they're doing it really fucking well, and they are going with the 90s formula that did make money and did know their audience and appealed to that audience. And if you're not that audience, then that ain't for you, baby. You don't like seeing scantily clad, large-breasted women or whatever on the cover of a fucking comic book? Don't buy it. Just don't buy it. I'm reminded of, let's bring this full circle, huh? Reminded of Bob Costas. How about that? There's a little football for you, or a little sports for you. Bob Costas, in the 90s, is one of the greatest interviews of all time. Interviewing Vince McMahon when wrestling was becoming white hot, Stone Cold, Rock, all these people were starting to become a thing. And Bob Costas is saying, you're doing this on your show, you're doing this on your show, and kids are seeing this, and blah, blah, blah. And Vince McMahon gets right in leans forward, gets right in Bob Costas' face. He says, you know what you can do? You can turn the TV off. Bam. It was, again, we have to accept, if we're going to be people that genuinely, and I think it's a great thing, it is becoming, there is definitely a overall awareness on the planet Earth that there are a lot of different ways of living, and we got to start respecting those. If we are going to respect all of these different ways of living, we need to understand that there are, and that some of those don't always play well necessarily with others, but then we don't have to force it upon each other either. There are people who want to read comic books that have scantily clad women. Those comic books sell very well. Is there a problem with that? Does that speak to an issue? Does that speak to the patriarchy or something like that? Maybe. Okay. But then you really got to go much bigger and say, well, then, comic books are a visual medium. My argument for the art, for that choice in artistic style, like your Rob Liefelds and Jim Lee's, and go down the list of them. Okay. My argument for that has always been, with a comic book, it's a very visual medium. Okay. And it's also not a large visual medium, meaning oftentimes to tell as much story as you can in one issue, back when you used to do that, when you used to tell one story in one issue, you might have an inch or two to get across, especially if there's a big battle, who is fighting, and how are you going to tell Wonder Woman from Superman? Okay, well, one way is one has a cape. In fact, that's part of the reason that a lot of heroes had capes. It was a way for you, in a very small frame, a very small picture, to know that that's the hero doing the business. That's why they had these outlandish, brightly colored costumes and all this stuff. It was to parlay instantly on a very small piece of paper, or part of that paper, what is going on. You do with women, how do you do that? Well, I guess you could give them capes, but then when it turns into like a Justice League situation or Justice Society of America or something like that, what are you going to do? Well, you accentuate the features of the gender of the character, or the biology of the character that is being put on the page. And so you end up with, women with large breasts and whatever else, and showing off their legs and all this stuff. I mean, that's part of why that happens. It is not, I mean, there are certainly times where it is, but it is not always because, well, we just want to get a bunch of teenage boys, hormones going. Because they do the same thing for the guys. Comic books, they were an equal opportunity employer as far as hiring superheroes go, because everybody looked completely outrageous. It's a story tactic for a visual medium. Okay? It's like method actors saying things louder and more slowly or something like that as compared to a standard actor. Wow, he sounds ridiculous. Well, yeah, that's so you can hear him in the back of the fucking theater and you can understand what's going on. It's the same idea. Does that sell more comic books? Well, it happens to do so. And is it appealing to parts of our animal selves? Yeah, guess what? That's what we are. And it's what we have. So we can't live in a world where I approve of this, where people are supported and allowed to look however they want to look and do what they do and all this stuff, and have the ultimate, the most amount of options in life. And then at the same time, focus group the shit out of everything so that it means nothing to nobody, as to where you could just appeal to the smaller amount of people. I mean, a lot of that, maybe it just all comes down to greed. I don't know. But that's what's wrong today. Focus groups, which doesn't allow them to do what made comic books hot and exciting and selling in the first place. Okay. And then maybe the bigger issue is just that pure greed of, there's just too much, big storylines. Like now they do a big storyline once or twice a year that covers all these comic books. You can't even afford to be a comic book fan today. You can't. So those are two of the big things, but I think I gave you, anything else that I talked about how things used to be that aren't there now. Well, that's what's going on. And that's part of my problem with it. Okay. This went really, really long. So let's get into our album of the week. My album of the week is actually an old album from the 90s that fell prey to, this whole, or I don't want to say fell prey because I don't think it's a problem. Okay. Look, if sex sells, if I'm buying sex, then fucking sell it to me, right? Understand? Why is this a fucking problem? Fuck. Anyway, so Danger Danger, one of my favorite bands of all time, easily in my top 10. They had an album come out in 91 called Screw It. Now, I'm going to let you walk away. Guess what? You get to walk away with not just stuff in your mind, but stuff that you can actually go and do. And I think you're going to enjoy. They had an album come out in 91 called Screw It. Now, here's the thing. At the time, digital mastering wasn't exactly a thing yet, but digital processing certainly was. And what sounded good on either again, this came out in 91, so you're coming out of the 80s music production process. Even though CDs have been around since like 1984, right? Anyway, what sounded good on an audio cassette, the most popular medium at the time, and what sounded good perhaps even on vinyl, if that was still a thing for some people. Okay, again, it takes time for these new, processing technologies and mastering technologies to become a thing, may not sound good on such a pure product as digital processing, which ends up on the CD. Okay? This is why things like THX had to become a thing anyway, right, in movies, okay, because it was processing for these new formats and new technologies to take advantage of that and for the sound to still sound good and not sound like tin. And that's the problem, is that if you bought, like, say, CDs from the 80s, A lot of them have a very tinny sound to them. Now, if you put them into an audio cassette, or if you maybe had them on vinyl, there would be a certain warmth that comes with analog processing of sound that you would get from that. Okay. And so a lot of these albums, frankly, and also their tuning, the volume on them is very, very low compared to a modern album, because again, digital mastering had not become the process that it would become, say, when you get to the aughts. Okay. And that's why in the late 90s, you had a lot of remasters, re-releases of albums. I mean, certainly that makes money for the record company as well, off the same music that's already in their catalog. But then also, there was justification for it, quite frankly, because, yeah, at the very least, turn up the gain on these fucking things, because it doesn't sound half as loud as music today. And so Screw It by Danger Danger, which is my favorite album by them. It's their second album. Their first one is their self-titled from 89. Screw It is one of those albums, and so is the first album, Danger Danger, where it just doesn't, it's a product of its time. Not that the music isn't great, it is. Not that the musicianship isn't top-notch, it is. Okay? The problem is the mastering process and the CD process at the time, not good. So, when you have MP3s based off of that CD, it sounds shitty and significantly more low volume than every other ounce of music than most of the music that you have. In 2002, a company called Bad Reputation, which is which they're like that Rock Candy Records that I mentioned at the beginning. Bad Reputation, out of France, did a remastering of Danger Danger's Screw It, and it ended up being a 2-disc affair. But they do a couple of very interesting things with this. So one is that they would split the first song, which is called Monkey Business. Now that has an intro called Ginger Snaps. That in the original CD version of it was one thing, but it was like this long 1.5-minute intro, which I know a lot of metal bands do. But it's this long 1.5-minute intro, and you just want to get into this really, really fun, sexy song. So this remaster that Bad Reputation did split that up. Okay, first off, they did remaster it. The gains turned up everything. I mean, and it sounds so fresh, so new. It sounds like a new album. But they split up the songs better, including the secret track at the end, which was DFNS. Then they put a new track a song I'd never heard before, called Just What the Doctor Ordered, on the first disc, and it's phenomenal. And then on the second disc, they took a live show recording that I don't know if this was available anywhere else. I know where it's also available now, but at 2002, I don't think this is available anywhere. But it's a whole live show from 1990 that obviously doesn't have any, because it's from 1990, it doesn't have any songs from Screw It, but it has really some of the best from their first album. And this is, oh man, I haven't been this excited listening to a live album in a long time, because they do some really long cuts and some fun stuff in the middle of these very fun, sexy songs, because that's what Danger Danger delivered primarily in their first couple of albums, was, just these sex-fueled, I mean, there's songs talking about threesomes and everything. I mean, it's just, it's nuts. It's so fun. And they even do a cover of Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, Hoochie Coo on, live. And that's fun too. Cause I think, their singer at the time, not Paulie Lane, but their singer Ted Poley, I think is just one of the best singers ever. It was really, really well done. And so this is something that I've known existed. I knew about this French remaster. I have been looking for it for a very long time. And I finally found it. And there is a website that I've been going to for a little while, because I used it to get some other things, including these rare bonus discs that were part of Motley Crue's Greatest Hits album back in 98, as well as to get Gene Simmons' Vault set. Okay. And I put a link in the show notes for this, and you can check it out, but it's 0, as in the number 0, Day Rocks, ROX, 0dayrocks.org. And this website, now here's the rub. Okay. I'm going to give you the secret of how to use this, because this guy is very clever in how he does everything to keep web crawlers from finding his site or finding his shit. But anyway, when you click, he does a blog post for each album that he puts up, and he puts up new albums every day. It's amazing. New releases, remasters, old releases. It's really incredible. A lot of out of print stuff. I mean, just about anybody. If you listen to my kind of music, any band you can think of, you can type in. You're going to find something just amazing when you do so through the search. But anyway, you go there. Now, when you click on one of the posts that tells you about the album that you're going to download, click on the cover artwork for the album. Okay, when you're at the post, and that will take you to the download link. It's not readily apparent there, and that's on purpose. And I think it's great. I think it's really, really brilliant. But I found this on there. He also had the Rock Candy remaster, speaking of them, of Danger Danger's first album, which also includes at the end 5 tracks, which is the 5 live tracks that are on the Bad Reputation edition of Screw It. So you could really get both of these albums, and I could really make them both albums of the week. But you gotta hear this. If you've never heard these albums, man, and the remastering is so stunning. The Rock Candy remaster of Danger Danger's self-titled album is fantastic too. Everything just sounds so fresh. Everything's popping in it. These sound like new albums, and fuck, if they sounded this good back then, man, I think Danger Danger would be a much bigger deal. I mean, they still would have ran into the brick wall of Nirvana, unfortunately, and fuck them, fuck Nirvana. But they could have been a lot bigger than they were. So anyway, Screw It, the Bad Reputation remaster 2-disc from Danger Danger, masterpiece of an album. I mean, I had to talk about it. And enjoy that website, Zero Day Rocks, because you're going to just find so much awesome shit there. It's really, really amazing. I mean, I feel like I have to replace half my music collection because they have so many better versions of these albums and everything there. It's just a stunning museum of sexiness and fun. So anyway, that'll be it for your Wednesday Q&A. We had a really, really long one here, almost went 2 hours. More Sovereign Tech to come out, and even in this last couple days of October, we have more coming for you. I will see all of you on the other side.